All right, so for today's lesson, we're going to talk about percentile ranking. And percentile ranking is really kind of what it says. It's really all about percent. What's interesting, though, is that percentile ranking is kind of wishy-washy in the way that you do it. Sometimes you do it one way, sometimes you do it another. So when we get to that part, I'll explain it to you. But the Regents will be very careful that their answers are definitely clear-cut and there won't be any sort of wishy-washy situations. But just kind of listen through the video and you kind of figure out, or I'll tell you what I'm talking about when we get to that point. So you can analyze a set of data by listing the numbers from least to greatest. Here are some of the terms that are used to describe an ordered set of data. Right, so you've got the maximum, which is always going to be the greatest number. You also have the minimum, which is always going to be the smallest number. Range, you know this already, it's going to be the difference between the max and the min. The median is always going to be the middle number after the numbers are written in numerical order. Then you've got some stuff that's new, the lower quartile, which we also sometimes call quartile 1. This is going to be the median of the lower half of the data numbers. You do not include the median of the entire data set. I'll explain that in a little bit too. Then there's also the upper quartile, or quartile 3, which happens to be the median of the upper half of the numbers. And you're not going to include the median of the entire data set when you calculate that also. But if you think about quartiles, it sounds like quarters. If you take all your data and break them into quarters, you're going to have the low quarter, which is quartile 1. So it's going to be the LQ, or sometimes they call it the Q1. You're going to have the middle quarter, which we call the median. But the median is also the quartile 2. So if the people are referring to quartile 2, that is just the median. And then you're going to have the upper quartile, which is going to be considered as UQ, or quartile 3. So those three lines, and you'll see in a second, those three lines are going to separate your data into 4 even sets of numbers. Okay, let's take a look at how this stuff is used. So this example, these are the finishing times in seconds for 16 students who participated in a 400-meter run. Those numbers in black are not in order. The numbers in blue are. Okay, so take a minute to write down the numbers in order. We need to identify the min, the max, the median, the lower quartile, the upper quartile. Well, the min and the max clearly should be very simple. The lowest value is 62. The highest value is 77. When we deal with the median, don't forget this is the same thing as quartile 2. We happen to have 16 kids. So if we take these kids and we chop them in half, we're looking at 8 on either side of the median. So if I go up 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the median happens to be right here. That number is not a number of the data set. That happens to be 71.5. Okay? So with that now, we've got two halves, the upper half and the lower half. Well, the lower quartile, which we sometimes call quartile 1, so now I'm going to go down to the lower half. And out of these 8, I have to break them up equally into 4. So that means if I count up 4, this right here becomes our lower quartile. That number is also not a number of the data set, but that would be 64. And then if I deal with the upper quartile, which is quartile 3, I'm also going to go over 4. And that number is also not a data set number. It happens to be 74. So what's happening now is you see 4 distinct quarters, evenly split of numbers. So I've got 4 values here. I've got 4 values here. I've got 4 values here. And I've got 4 values here. Those are the 4 quarters of your numbers. What you need to understand, because when we get into box and whisker plots, what you need to understand is that the range in those quarters are very different. In other words, if you look at this first set of 4 groups, the first 25%, the range here is a difference of 1 between highest and lowest within that quartile. In this quartile group, the range between highest and lowest is 6. It's a larger spread between low and high. And this one, the range between high and low is 1, and this one it's 2. So when we start doing box and whisker plots, you're going to wonder why the data set looks differently, does not look like it's evenly spread out, but it will be. There are 4 numbers within each of those quarters, but the range in between those quarters are a little bit different. Okay, so we've got min, max, median, quartile 1, quartile 3. If we take a look at the next one, we talk about percentile. It's like the percentages. I know you guys have been to the doctors that talked about like your height and your weight on a certain percentile, or if you take a test, you know, SATs, but I think there's other like state tests that talk about percentiles. So percentiles is the percentage of scores at or below, okay, at or below a particular value. So you've got to count, you know, as many of those values exist that they're talking about. So data values. So if you take a look at some data values here, we've done this percentile thing. We've broken things into quarters. You know that the lowest score is on that bar. Quartile 1 is going to be on this bar. Quartile 2 is on this bar, quartile 3, and that's going to be your highest number, or the max. So those are directly on the bars. So basically, if you're at quartile 1, you are a value at the 25th percentile. And this number here is at the 50th percentile. And this number here is at the 75th percentile. So if 75% of test scores are 81 or less, then 81 represents the 75th percentile. It should make a lot of sense. Here's where we get into a little bit of the wishy-washy area. So here's a 20 set of test scores, all in numerical order for you. So what we would do is if we wanted to break this data set up, what we could do is say, all right, well, I've got 20 scores, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this would be my median, or quartile 2. That's going to be 82, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is going to be my quartile 3. This is going to be 89.5. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is going to be my quartile 1, and this becomes 67. Okay, so we've got all those pieces. If we now start looking at the questions, what percentile does a score of 78 represent? Well, 78 is this score right here and all these scores below it. So there happen to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 scores out of the 20 represents what percentile, or what percent. When you set this thing up and you solve this thing, cross multiply and solve, you're going to get 20x equals 900, so x equals 45. So a score of 78 represents the 45th percentile. That should be easy. What score is at the 75th percentile? Well, we know that already because that's quartile 3. This is the 75th percentile. So we already know it's 89.5. What test score is at the 90th percentile? Well, that we don't know. So then what we need to figure out is, well, what test score should we look at? So we want to find out what test score out of the 20 represents 90% of everything. When you cross multiply here and solve, you get 100x equals 1800, and x is going to be the 18th score. Well, now which score is the 18th? I know that this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. 92 is the 18th score. Okay? The wishy-washy part comes here at number 2. And here's where you can do it either way, I guess, even though I prefer that you do your 75th percentile the way that we did it, by breaking it up into the median and then the upper half and the lower half. If you want to think about percentile again as being a percent, if you do 2 like you did 3 and you say x over 20 equals 75 out of 100, right? Because like we did number 3, x over 20 equals 90 over 100. When you do this cross multiplication and everything, you're going to end up with x being the 15th score. Well, what happens now is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 89 happens to be that 15th score. But we know 89.5 is exactly on the 75th percentile. So here's where I'd have to take either answer. I think the green answer is better, but I'd have to take the black answer, assuming you're doing stuff with percentages. Okay, let's move on to the next part. Quiz scores based on the table above. How many students are in the class? We'll just add up all the number of students. So 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 6 plus 5 plus 3 plus 1. That's going to give you 24 kids. All right, so I've got 24 students. Well, I'm going to jump to 3 for a second. What's the maximum score? Well, that's going to be a score of 10. What's the minimum score? That's going to be a score of 4. It's the other ones that you have to be careful about. Remember, there's 24 kids. So median doesn't mean that you can look at the scores and find the middle score. It means you got to look at the number of kids that are all lined up. So I'm not going to do this whole chart, but if you take a look, you know that the first 2 kids have scores of 4. Maybe I will write them all out. The next 3 all have 5s. There's 4 kids that have a 6. There's 6 kids that have a 7. There's 5 kids with an 8. There are 3 kids with a 9. And there's 1 kid with the 10. I should have 24 scores out here. The median score is the person that's smack in the middle, which means I have to go in 12 people. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This would be the median score. It's not a data set, but I'd have to ask the 12th kid, what was your score? He'd say a 7. I could ask the 13th kid, what was your score? He'd say a 7. Well, the average of those 2 scores would just be a 7. So the median score is going to be a 7. Lower quartile. I'm going to have to go through here and say, okay, well, if I have 12 kids to the left of my median, I got to go in 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This would be my lower quartile, quartile 1. Now, again, I can't split a kid, but on either side of that quartile is a 6, so I know that the lower quartile, that person's got a score of a 6. The upper quartile, I've got to go on 6 also. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've got 6 on either side of that. What's nice is on either side of my upper quartile, they're both the same score, so the upper quartile score is an 8. Okay, so there you go. All right, so good luck on the homework.